Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk, and we are discussing national political news of the day. And this week, we had to choose because there are so many things going on. And if it's not, your topic of interest, we will definitely cover it in the future because most of these stories span more than a week. But tonight, we want to discuss, some what appears to be some good news with regard to inflation. Inflation is down. There have been indications that it's been cooling off, possibly cooling off over the past few months, and possibly not cooling off in a way that will cause a recession. There may be a soft landing. The Fed met today, and Jerome Powell said that they may actually start lowering the interest rates again next year, which would be good for a lot of people, including people in debt and people who have variable interest mortgage rates, and good for the housing market in general, which has suffered. But they are projecting that the inflation rate would fall to 2.8%. Of course, the target goal of the Fed is the Federal Reserve is 2%, and it is approaching that. But I think they wanted to state that they probably don't think they're going to be increasing it. They keep it on the table, but they're probably not going to be increasing rates anymore because they've got the way the Fed works. It's like running a big ocean liner. You got to start things in advance. It doesn't turn on a dime. So if they see trends with the economy, they want to project ahead of time that they might be reducing interest rates, and they of course never want to take anything off the table. I've been complaining on this show and elsewhere that Powell is obsessed with inflation at the expense of all other aspects of the economy. But and I question whether or not the raising the interest rates in this time was actually the major cause of inflation coming down. There were like multiple interest rate increases before even the first decline of inflation. But a lot to discuss there, and we'll discuss the politics of it, how this could play out for particularly the presidential election, but also other elections. Dave?
Yeah, thank you for that intro. I like the idea of us talking about the technical stuff first and then pivoting to the politics. So as you mentioned, there are indications inflation's coming down. This is one of those areas where the Fed says through formal language that is also meant to get people guessing about what they actually mean. But the takeaway is that the language, the announcement is it's indicative. There will be no more increases, hard stop. So strongly hinting we could expect multiple rate cuts next year. So the question is like, why, right? And so what they decided to keep rates unchanged with the top of the level now, that's 5.5%, which this is what they've done for 3 meetings in a row. What they did was they changed one word in one key sentence, and so they added the word any in the sentence, basically saying, in determining the extent of any additional policy firming. Before that any wasn't in there. What that implies is that they think that they could get us to 2% inflation without any other increases. And so if there's some other thing that happens, which they're basically saying we don't think anything else is going to happen that will lead us to that choice, then we might do something different. But their projection to the future, which is called the dot plot, where each of the 19 members, they just kind of say, oh, in each quarter going forward for the next year and change, what do we think it's going to look like? And the takeaway here is that the trajectory of the policy rates in the future indicate, like I said, or it was about to say, 25 basis point cuts, 3/4 point cuts next year. But the consensus, the big bulk, the big group of the majority, I think like 15 out of the 19 said they're either going to have 2 or 3 or 4 cuts. So for our purposes, because we're talking about the political implications, that means that the economic climate that the Fed is seeing looks like it's getting better, and that they plan on making it even better. So your concept that you mentioned, the soft landing, that's really what they're going for. We're still seeing inflation. So there's like two indicators. There's the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and there's the core consumer price index, where core takes out food and energy because they jump
Yeah.
around so much. Um, but in this case, whether you look at one or the other, both seemed pretty good. 3.36% annualized versus a little bit less than that for the other one. So we are talking about relatively benign in numbers. So 3.1% is overall, 3.36 is core. So 3% inflation is great, and it's looking like it's going to get incrementally better. And we could talk more about those details if you want.
Sure. But one of the things that has caused it to drop is the price of oil and gas are dropping. That's been a big deal. That's one of those things that affects the way you feel about the economy when you're not spending as much going into the tank. They think the average price per gallon might dip below 3% before any other significant raises. The Dow Jones exploded pretty much. I hit record levels after this report came out, and then there, if you want to look at the details of it, one of the issues is food is still high. Restaurants are still
Yeah.
very high, and the rest. But there are certain foods you can buy that are a lot cheaper. Eggs prices have dropped partly because they were inflated last year by the by the flu syndrome that was spreading and limiting the eggs that could be sold. But certain types of produce have also dropped in price. So maybe this is an incentive to eat healthy for a while. Who knows? I mean, meat has not dropped, and restaurants take a while to drop. They don't like to drop. Once they hit a price, they like to kind of keep it that way. The restaurants are always on a margin, but like anything else, they will drop if the demand drops. So but right now, the way it's been going is, we've had inflation partly because people just keep spending. They're angry about inflation, but they spend anyways. I mean, and if you talk about the supply and demand system, if you're going to pay the prices, that's what the prices are going to be. But it's just because people had raises and everything, but they still just don't feel good about it. It's right in front of them, and I believe and we can go into this maybe segue into the politics of it, but I believe that's a psychology that's been hurting Biden the whole time, because whether it's deserved or not, the president takes the blame or credit for whatever the inflation is for the economy in general. And if you don't feel good about what you're doing and paying more money, especially a generation that's never really experienced inflation like this, that has to get under control before you feel good about the economy, even if all of these other indications, in being reported in the Wall Street Journal are good. And that's been his problem. So, the question is if inflation's not an issue next year, is this going to have an impact on Biden's polls?
Yeah, before we go to the polls, let's talk a little bit more about what people are experiencing, because polls are, like you said, it's how people feel about the economy around them and their purchasing power ultimately. And even though we are seeing some of the lowest unemployment numbers in a long time, and the job market is still hot, there's still lots of hiring going on. It started to finally cool down a little bit, the hiring numbers this month, but we've got more people working, and wages are going up, so there's more money in their pocket. It's just that inflation was that much higher for many, many, many reasons. We talked about supply chain, COVID, extraordinary profits. These are the types of reasons why costs go up. But now we're starting to see it, while it's moderating, still food, like you said, food inflation is still really high. The cost of things like cars and appliances and furniture, durable goods, those are dropping. Sharp drop in energy. I think gas is down like over 6%,
Yeah.
which is a huge thing. But home ownership and renting, that is a key pain point. Services in general are continuing to go up. That's still like 6%, 5.8%, which is nearly double regular inflation. So that's things like housing, healthcare, and insurance. Those services make up about 65% of what we spend our money on in the modern economy. So because that piece of our spending is still very high, that's how we feel it. Housing is most notable. Housing, so actual ownership costs are way up because houses themselves have gone up 33% in the last 2 years. Interest rates during the last 3 years have gone up the equivalent of 100 and whatever the number is, 86%, I think it is, because it went
And
from
it's
a very
weird.
low number to a very high number.
It's weird about housing because houses aren't moving. So why are the prices going up? And houses aren't moving because people can't get decent loans. That is one of the strangest effects to me. Why are people not dropping the prices of their houses? And I don't know.
Well, in part, it's because rents keep going up because landlords are taking the opportunity. So whether it's actual home ownership costs or reported rent costs or reported rent, landlords also are part of the survey. And no matter where you look, the rate is between 5 and 7% annualized increases. Over time, that's really painful. And so because rents are high and landlords have the ability to raise rents, we do have Wall Street, pools, hedge funds, other large financial institutions that are buying housing portfolios. So I just saw a show about one landlord that has 60,000 houses. So they're just scooping them up because they can get maybe some favorable credit terms if you're a hedge fund or a Wall Street firm.
Sure.
And for portfolio investment, if prices keep going up, then that's showing a net increase. They can get more money in. But so I think housing is a pain point. Not to dwell on it for too long. But I just want to mention this one weird thing just because it's healthcare. Healthcare costs have gone up so much since 2018 that the Department of Labor said we can't, the tail would wag the dog if we continue to consistently track them the way that we did. So for the last 12 months, I mentioned this on a prior show, they've actually created a formula to make healthcare costs rebase back to 2018. So 5 years ago, that price point, they wanted to reach that part again. So this is very technical, but the idea is that healthcare costs have not really been captured in the inflation numbers for the last 12 months, which is a sort of a negative, drag on the rate, but that's ended now. So if healthcare companies, insurance companies continue to raise rates like they have, we'll see that add back into inflation. So that the main reason I mentioned that is because we're about to talk about the politics of it, which is how we feel, but the numbers that get reported are very technical. And so there's some tinkering that happens to try to keep the numbers in alignment with over time, basically.
Yeah, we've discussed on past shows. There have been accusations of price gouging in some of these things, particularly with gas. But we don't have to go there. A lot is happening. The supply for gasoline is up, not just because we're doing more drilling here, but Biden, to the irritation of the Republicans, is actually opening up oil from Venezuela, and also allowed Iran to sell a bunch of its oil. I mean, there's a lot going on into that. But the politics of it is Biden knows that he needs. It's not enough to get up and say the economy's doing well, even if all the numbers say it does. If you're spending too much money for meat, you're not going to be happy. And voters aren't going to be happy. And they're going to blame it on the president because who else do you blame it on, right? You can't unelect the Fed chief. So this looks like it probably will be good news for Joe Biden. I noticed the Republicans were a bit quiet today. They'll probably try to frame some way as well, meat's still expensive, and we still need to drill more. I mean, that's what Trump said about his day one dictatorship. We're going to drill, 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 and so he's conscious of it, and the Republicans will try to use it against him. But if inflation is down to 2% and prices of food do drop or at least moderate to the point where people get used to them, this won't be the weapon that the Republicans were hoping it would be.
It's certainly not going to have as much teeth or as much bite, but I would argue the damage has been done. So if you do look at so there's a couple different polling places you could look at. So one I looked at earlier was called Statista, and so there's just this general question. I think this is like a finger to the wind question. How would you describe the current state of the American economy? 48% say poor, 26% say fair. That's 74% pessimism
Mhm.
versus 5% say excellent, 18% say good, 23% optimism. So generally speaking, it's like 3 to 1 people are somehow have internalized the message that something is really wrong. And so we can get more into it, but it
Yeah.
does there's a very strong division between Republicans and Democrats. And as the election comes forward, we'll talk more and more about it. But like one really interesting takeaway is that nearly half of all voters say Biden's policies and his administration has hurt their financial health, while
Mm.
less than 1 in 5 believe it's actually helped. But with Republicans, it's 84%. So that's like the
Yeah.
bell curve. That's like
Yeah.
almost all Republicans say, yes,
Yeah.
his policies have
But
hurt me.
there are a lot of Republicans that are going to say that anyway, even if they're thriving. That's just, that's what they do. Some Democrats do that too. I mean, it's just like, but we're almost a year away from the election. I mean, I think we have to remember that the memories are really short. If they're doing well, they're not going to remember how badly they felt back in November of 2023. And again, it depends on how Biden sells it. The problem is he's been a very bad salesman up until now.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant, targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
Former President Trump is, as we've discussed over and over again, and as I think almost all of our listeners know, is facing charges for various crimes, nearly 100. And part of his argument is that he is entitled to, his defense is that he's entitled to blanket immunity. And because he was president, almost on the verge of saying that if you do anything during the presidency, you can't be charged with a crime for it. There's a lot of layers of it, but he is raising it now, and since it was going to be held in the appellate court, he was using it as a chance to be able to try to put off the Jack Smith trials, the federal ones, while this was heard. Well, Jack Smith did a counter and asked for the Supreme Court to basically bypass the appellate courts to come to a decision about this, so that they can possibly maintain their trial schedule. Who knows how long it will take the Supreme Court to do this, but there have been instances in the past, examples in the past of where the Supreme Court has done this. There's precedent for skipping the lower courts. One of them involved German spies who were captured during World War II. They came off of a submarine. They were going to do sabotage, and they got caught. And there was there were questions of law about what they can do with them. And the Supreme Court held emergency session, bypassing all of the appellate courts, and made a decision on that. Similarly, during Watergate, they skipped it to determine whether or not he should turn over everything that he hadn't turned over. They did that in a hurry for reasons. So this one has all the elements, and curiously enough, the majority of the Supreme Court it is wanting to hear this right away, and a lot of legal experts are saying this is an indication that maybe there are enough votes that are going to reject Trump's argument. The suspicion is at least 5 of them. I would say probably Roberts and Kavanaugh don't want to do this. Maybe one of the others, but it is going to be heard relatively soon. So this is a big deal. Trump hasn't said a whole lot about it other than this kind of, unless he wins it, it kind of tosses one tool of his strategy out.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. I think, like as always, that I appreciate your setup. Just mention that the trial judge in his U.S. federal case, Judge Tanya Chutkan, said, that they put a pause in the proceedings in the trial, saying that this pause automatically stays any further proceedings that will move this case towards trial or impose additional burdens of litigation on the defendant. Basically, it's a timeout on the actual trial so that Trump's team can focus on responding by, I think the deadline is December 20th to on their argument that basically in support of the imperial presidency, that the president can do whatever that person wants to do while they are president without consequence. And I think that the customary practice in our country is that presidents are exempt from trial during their presidency, but that does not directly correlate to a get out of jail free pass for anything they've ever done. And even Judge Chutkan said, quote, whatever immunities a sitting president may enjoy, the United States has only one chief executive at a time, and that position does not confer a lifelong get out of jail free pass. Former presidents enjoy no special conditions on their federal criminal liability. So I think we'll call it the lower court ruling. That court said, no, I'm not going to respect your request for your immunity here. And so if it went through a long and lengthy appeals process, it would really delay the outcome of this case. So that's
even if you tried to expedite it through that, it would. There's no way the trial could go forward. And the trial's set for March 4th, by the way. That's just around the corner, really.
Exactly right. That's when our election is, I think, in our state, March 5th, and it seems like tomorrow. So yeah, if you're in this huge federal case with all these, the scope of this is immense. That's really soon. But so I want to touch on one of the things that you said, which is your expectation that possibly Kavanaugh and Roberts are interested in hearing this case. I did come across some information that when Kavanaugh was in law school, writing for the Georgetown Law Journal, he published an article where he looked back all the way to the Civil War era at all of the claims that a president was immune from proceedings, and this possibly was relative to President Clinton at the time. It seems like the type of thing he would have been interested in at that time. But basically what he said was that, Congress does its political thing, impeachment or no impeachment. The criminal process is different, and Congress should have a rule that says that the criminal process for the president picks up after their term in office is over. So in his, unstated premise there basically is accountability, that the president ultimately does face a day in court. So he's already said, like, hey, I looked at everything going back to the Civil War, and this is my opinion. Maybe his opinion has changed, but if it hasn't, that's a sign that he would at least possibly side with the liberal justices on the court, that the president can't do anything scot-free. And arguably, like you said, just to wrap up here, I think Chief Justice Roberts is a traditional conservative Republican enough, so much that rather than being overtly political, he would probably want to maintain the continuity of accountability that we have under law.
Agreed. I don't know that I agree with Kavanaugh on one point. I don't know that Congress needs to do anything. Congress can't rule on that. This is the independent judiciary. This is something that we have in this country. It's really up to the judiciary to rule on that in the criminal justice system. But that's a small point, and
Plus, he was in law school. This was a long time ago.
yeah, but it's no, and a point is that they may actually meet even though they're out of session. They're not expected. They're not. There's nothing on the schedule for them to meet until January 5th, when they would have one of their private sessions. But the other times that I cited, both during World War II and during Watergate, they were out of session. They had to come back. They had to fly back to Washington to hold court with regard to those issues. So I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Supreme Court can take up any case they want. They can grab stuff. It's that's why they are the Supreme Court. They can take over and they can run a trial at the district court level. They can't affect states' claims or anything like that, but they have the power to do this. They're not bound by anything that Congress writes or any of that. And like I said, there is precedent for this, and there is good reason to want to have this resolved early, because it applies to other cases as well, which are coming otherwise. And when you talk about a stay on the case, that means they can't conduct disclosure. A lot of things can't happen during that time while it's all pending. So and they can't do motions, and they need to do that. So Jack Smith, in requesting this, that was a really quick thinking on his part to request this, and we'll see what happens with it, whether they'll meet before January 5th, and I suspect they will. I suspect it'll probably happen in the next couple of weeks. They might tell them that they can brief it until January 5th, but this is we live in interesting times when this happens. I mean, World War II and Watergate, those were interesting times. It's not something that will normally happen.
Yeah, and so December 20th is just a week away from the day we're recording this, so that's how fast both teams need to get their work together.
Yeah.
The idea is that it will be expedited, at least in theory. I'm curious. I know we have limited time. So we're not that close yet. But this claim from Trump's legal team included not just this sort of imperial president claim, but also of immunity. But also they said that this is a constitutional violation, these charges, because of his right to free speech. And they also said it was a double jeopardy claim because he already faced charges, air quotes, in the impeachment process. And I mean, I think these are both relatively easy to undermine, but I'm curious your thoughts on both.
I think he's got problems with those. I think his best shot is with immunity, and I don't think he has a good chance on that from what I'm hearing. I do not believe that the Supreme Court, even the conservatives, maybe Thomas, but any of the conservatives would rule that the double jeopardy, the impeachment is not a criminal charge. It's not. There's no due process there. It hasn't been resolved. It's done by vote. It's a purely political process. I actually think at this point it's been shown to be useless. Almost, certainly with regard to a president. I question whether or not it would have whether Nixon would have been convicted under the impeachments if they did that. I think if he was alive, he'd be kicking himself, saying, "Why did I do that? I should have taken it all away and lobbied at least 40 senators, right? You can get 40 senators." So that's not a process. It's not a criminal charge. So it's you can't go to jail for it. That's the whole idea of double jeopardy. With regard to free speech, I don't even know what to say about that. It's first of all, he's being charged with interfering with the process and actually doing affirmative things, not just talking, to thwart the election process. So I don't know where he thinks he's going to get that. Maybe that could get him out of trouble possibly for the January 6th thing, but he's not even being charged for that, for incitement. There is a lot of law that shuts down a lot of incitement law, but he's not being charged with that yet. So it's just, I don't see any of those flying. I think he's got to make that immunity claim, and I think the whole idea was just to delay the proceedings. I don't think he ever expected to win that.
I think I agree with everything you just said. I just want to push back slightly. One of the quotes. So I'm agreeing with you that that this is like a preemptive attempt to say, hey, wait, you're going to try to punish him for his speech, even though, like you said, there are some charges that are completely not relevant to that claim. But one of the things in Trump's motion said that they were prosecuting him that criminalizes core political speech. He had a right to raise questions about the election. And here's the quote. The fact that the indictment alleges that the speech at issue was supposedly, according to the prosecution, false makes no difference. Under the First Amendment, each individual American participating in a free marketplace of ideas, not the federal government, decides for him or herself what is true and false on great disputed social and political questions. So the reason I give you that quote, it's probably not changing your mind, but the idea is I think that they have his phone records now, and they're able to see what communications went back and forth with people, and they tried to, there's inference here that the prosecutor is basically saying, look, enough people told you lost that you knew this whole thing was false. And what they're pushing back is saying, hey, we got advice on both sides, and the government doesn't get to decide what we think is true or false.
That's true, and that, like I said, would get him off for the incitement. But it's just an element. It's not even whether he was telling the truth or not with regard to trying to and this isn't a Jack Smith claim. This is going to the Fannie Wills case in Georgia. When he was on the phone trying to intimidate the what do you call it, person,
Secretary of State.
General, of Georgia, to find him 12,000 whatever votes. There were intimidation factors in there, and you cannot fraudulently represent things in that context. You have to, if you knew that it was false, then you're not, that's a different situation. But again, he's trying to use it to get out of the Jack Smith charges.
Overnight, a setback for abortion rights advocates. In a first-of-its-kind case, the Texas Supreme Court temporarily blocking 31-year-old Kate Cox from obtaining an emergency abortion. Cox, a mother of two, filed the legal challenge at 20 weeks pregnant. Her doctor saying her fetus has virtually no chance of survival. They warn continuing to carry the pregnancy could jeopardize her health and future fertility.
There's no outcome here, that results in us taking home a healthy baby girl.
Many of Ms. Cox's health risks during this pregnancy will put her life in danger if left untreated.
The plaintiffs have not shown that they will suffer an immediate and irreparable injury.
So we're going to take the national discussion into Texas with national implications, but we have a case in which Kate Cox, a 31-year-old woman from Dallas, petitioned a state court for an exemption from the state's really strict laws, anti-abortion laws. She just learned that her 20-week-old fetus was diagnosed with full trisomy 18. I don't know anything about that disease, but it's a fatal condition for the fetus that could also lead to severe pain and increased risk of pregnancy and birth complications, possibly render her infertile for the rest of her life, and maybe even a threat to her life. Since the doctors basically said that this fetus is not going to survive. It's not going to become a child and survive. The lower court, the district court, granted her the exemption, And then really quickly, the Texas Republican leadership got involved, and it got the Texas Supreme Court got involved. The appellate court lifted the stay. Pardon me. Denied her the exemption. And it looked like they're going to delay things even more, although they don't have to, because the Supreme Court basically ruled that she can't have an abortion. I'll talk about why in just a second, but she ultimately had to leave the state to have an abortion, which could actually still get her prosecuted if she returns to Texas, in theory. But the legal theory is that she was not in imminent danger. There is no exception for a fetus that's not going to survive anyway. I mean, that is how, blatantly crazy this law is getting. And, this is definitely politically not something that any of the sane Republicans wanted to have happen, but it is really bad. I mean, it made Texas look like a third world country, and this takes us all back to Dobbs. And there's another case, by the way, going up before the Supreme Court. We'll see how that goes, that is almost as big as Dobbs. But it's just, the only thing they focused on was not whether it's a viable pregnancy, but whether or not, the fact of the matter is she's pregnant. The way the Texas law is written is that she only gets the exception if there's an imminent threat to her life. I mean, that is just absolutely bizarre. And you would think that the Texas courts would have wanted to maybe loosen it up a little so that they don't seem so draconian. But this was such a blatant, seizure of rights. I don't even know what to say about it. It's terrifying that they ruled this way, and that the law is written this way.
Yeah. Again, as always, thank you for that intro. And I think you framed it well. I think everything you said is accurate about this. The one of the key elements here is, like you said, the way the laws are written. There are, there's a role for doctors to make the case. I think it actually literally says doctors must rely on reasonable medical judgment. But the problem is that that's also a standard that allows their decisions to get challenged more easily. So even in this case, the Attorney General of Texas, Paxton, besides writing a threatening letter to the doctors saying, "Hey, we'll prosecute you," openly, publicly, which is arguably coercive use of state authority for political grandstanding purposes. I don't think that needed to be public, for example. But the idea is that when this did go in front of the Supreme Court, all Paxton needed to do was put forward another doctor that said, "I certify that her life was not in danger." And then for the court, it has 9 elected Republicans, the Texas Supreme Court. So they, unanimously sided with the state attorney general, Ken Paxton, saying that, the health wasn't threatened. So we don't consider it. So that, in and of itself, really only pertains, like you said, to Ms. Cox here. There is another case coming up in the pipeline in Texas. It's called Zurowoski versus Texas, and that's more broadly aimed at resolving medical confusion that could be in play. If a doctor deems an abortion medically necessary within the bounds of law, then they should be free from fear of civil or criminal punishment. They could have huge fines, or they could even go to jail for life. So that's no small thing. And it's not just the doctors themselves. It's the company, the administration, the organization, the hospital structure around them. Their risk management teams are saying, don't even think about saying the word, basically. So it's not just confusion and fear that's preventing abortions. It's worse. It's a systematic, oppressive state. And you would think that libertarian minded folks would not want the power of the state to come down so heavy. And so, I mean, we can get a little bit more into it, but
Yeah,
one thing,
but
yeah, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
want to go back to Paxton's letters.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Paxton, he's somebody who basically just barely avoided being removed on corruption allegations himself. And here, he's not just writing to the doctors. He wrote to the hospitals too. He says, for giving the doctors access to the hospital, your hospital may be liable for negligently credentialing the physician and failing to exercise appropriate professional judgment, among other potential regulatory and civil violations, if you permit Dr. Karzan to perform an unlawful abortion. I mean, they're intimidating everybody. And I want to also point out that if you go to read the Supreme Court decision, which probably shouldn't have even been issued because it became moot. They knew that she'd already left the state to get her abortion. They provided almost no guidance. You know, this is what the courts are supposed to do. They're supposed to basically discuss the law, what it means, and provide some guidance, some bright lines, so that a doctor would know whether or not they're violating the law. So the hospital would know that whether or not they're violating the law. So the individual who needs the abortion, the woman would know, have it, but they did nothing. They just said, nope, this is the decision, no exception. And so, yeah, there's complete fear. Basically, effectively, there's no exception in Texas unless they could show that the mother is going to die, I guess, in the next hour. I mean, it's really just borderline ridiculous. And, we'll get onto the politics later, but the Democrats really need to hammer on this and hammer hard. This is Handmaid's Tale stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're talking about. Just for numbers, to put some objective numbers behind it, in the year 2020, the year, a couple of years ago, Texas had about 50,000 abortions in a year. This year so far, there's been 34. So that's a massive difference. One other piece of this too, which is, I talked to friends and colleagues who are conservative about this issue, and most of them are pretty level-headed and open-minded about the fact that there really aren't very many people getting abortions late term. So even in Texas, in a state with 50,000 abortions, one of the biggest states in the country, there were only 2,500 operational procedures in 2020, dilation and evacuation, after the 13th week. So the second trimester. That's a very small number. So really, what we're talking about in most cases is just taking a pill. It's the morning after pill type thing. So medical abortions are really, that's going to go to the Supreme Court, because this is something that they're concerned. Conservative folks who are pro-life, but who are sort of radically Texas style pro-life, that those pills are going to be available to people, and they'll still be able to make these choices, and they're going to want to try to cut down on that. But one other thing, last thing here about the number, like the number 34. Amy O'Donnell, who's a spokeswoman for Texas Alliance for Life, which is an anti-abortion group, obviously, she said that the fact that several dozen abortions have been performed this year shows that the medical exceptions to the bans are working. So in other words, if you narrowly define your empathy for people in plight, risk of sterilization, risk of death to the fetus and the baby as a newborn, et cetera, the types of medical conditions that implore some people to choose an abortion, that they're saying that, like, well, this is okay with us, but really, and I'll just quote Mitt Romney. He said over this past weekend, he said, hey, there's a lot of people with moral values that are pro-life. There's a lot of people with moral values who are pro-choice. We live in a country where we have to live side by side. We need a legal system that accommodates both of our moral visions, and it's not working the way it's set up in Texas. So that's straight from, Senator Mitt Romney from Utah, who's a pro-life conservative.
He is. He's a Mormon. I mean, outright and devout. But we need the bright lines, and 34, works out for the 34. There really are very few late-term abortions, and they're only granted in emergency. A lot of times the opposition to abortions likes to make it sound like it's elective. It's not elective, not anywhere. This is this is considered to be an extreme procedure, and it can actually. I mean, there are medical guidelines for it, and the medical guidelines are pretty strict. You do this in extreme situations, and but they use that saying, well, they describe the process of it, which is horrific. But it's, again, this is they don't do it. Most doctors won't do it if unless it's in the unless there is an emergency. It's just, it's not done. The medical establishments take care of a lot of this stuff, and they're just not even being allowed to thrive. I'm surprised that there were courage of the doctors to do even those 34, because there's right now you're taking some serious chances if you've got a court that's going to interpret it differently. This is not, medical decisions, again, shouldn't even be in the court except in extreme situations. And it's really difficult for a judge or a jury, even in medical malpractice actions, to come up with what was the proper procedure, because sometimes there's not even agreement within it. But I'm kind of getting off the topic here in terms of that. But again, politically, I think this is going to backfire. I think that the youth have been turning out in elections where abortion is an issue, and they just made it an issue on Texas. I, up until now, didn't think there was much of a chance of taking of Democrats defeating Ted Cruz, but he's going to have to be very careful how he addresses this, because they're going to use this. There's going to be constant pressure on him to comment on this woman alone.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things come to mind in what you just said. As a practical matter, Senator Cornyn from Texas was asked his opinion on this, and he said, "I answer to the things I'm accountable for. This is not something I'm accountable for. I'm not answering."
Yeah, that's wimpy.
Yeah, it's wimpy. It's wimpy in the context of these are 50 states, and about half of them have similarly confining rules. Where Texas has a 6-week abortion ban. Most people don't even know they're pregnant in the first 6 weeks or so. So realistically, unless you're only using the pill as truly a morning after pill, then you're not going to know. Many people are not going to know they're pregnant in time for that law. So it's disingenuous. And so we'll get to the politics in a second, but just for doctors, for the sake of doctors, it's the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. But what one of the doctors in Texas said was that we either go ahead with procedure based on our conscience and our best medical judgment, and risk felony prosecution, which could end our careers, end our freedom, or wait until a woman's health deteriorates to the point where no one would question the medical need. So they are intentionally causing harm through inaction in many cases because of a administrative risk, fear, because of overreaching political decisions. And so that 6-week decision actually has implications on real lives. A 6-week abortion ban, like the one in Florida that Governor DeSantis supported. So any of the places, any state, any politician, anywhere who thinks that this is a viable policy that's consistent with the community's values, I think that they're learning that it's off base, and that in fact there should be they should anticipate consequences come election day.
I agree, and this is similar to I believe it was the Ohio case where the woman where the girl was given the abortion, and then Jordan wanted to investigate the doctor and the rest. There is a tone deafness here on the part of a lot of the Republicans. They just don't understand why this is terrifying to the most of the rest of the world. I mean, Poland, by the way, recently had an election that took out the right-wing government, partly because the abortion policy there was so draconian, and 2 women actually died for the lack of abortions. It was so strict, and they cheered. There's stadiums of people cheering when the government got taken out, and it was abortion. And Poland's a very Catholic country, always has been, even through communism. It was very, very culturally conservative in a lot of ways. If they, if that's the reaction in Poland, it could very easily be a reaction in Texas, which we've been talking about how it's purple and might be going blue over the years, but it just doesn't quite happen. It's been kind of close in some elections, but I bet the Democrats are going to start pouring money into Texas after this.
So between issues like this, culture war issues, and which obviously this is our segment for today, but speaking about Texas, the border also, for a while, maybe there's been some short-sightedness from national leadership, Democratic leadership in the White House about how to handle the border, in part because of, I think that the environment of compromise doesn't exist when it comes to border talk. Although now that's changing in light of some, foreign policy funding pressures. But besides the border in Texas, these culture war issues are this is the one I think that is the sort of Achilles heel of the existing power structure.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
This is in context of the pending impeachment hearings, inquiry hearings in Washington, D.C. I know that the new Speaker of the House and sort of the more activist peers of his, they really want to get Joe Biden's impeachment inquiry, the ink dry on that to get that going forward. But there's a little bit of pressure pushback from the White House, basically saying that, hey, look, unless it's an actual impeachment, then the subpoena that comes out of an inquiry, we're not going to respond to, which is going to put some pressure back on the Speaker of the House to pass actual impeachment paperwork. So actually to formalize the vote and change it from just, air quotes, just an inquiry to an actual, the full blown drafted articles of impeachment. Now, chances are there's not enough evidence there to move forward with that. So in a sense, the White House is trying to call their bluff, but this game of chicken might actually end up in a sort of a very weak impeachment process. That's my prediction.
I think I decide what they're going to actually charge him with.
Right.
All right. I'm a little bit related. Hunter Biden, of course, has been charged with additional tax evasion issues here in California. He had offered to go speak at at Comer's committee, but he wanted to be live in front of everybody out in the open on live television. The Republicans got really nervous about that, and they're not doing it. They chickened out right away and said, no, we want you to come in privately so we can release things on our own terms. We don't want, anyway, they didn't say that, but that's pretty much what they did. So Hunter Biden actually went with the help of Representative Swalwell from California, former candidate for president, got to actually go to the place where they hold press conferences in Washington after Swalwell reserved this spot for him. Hunter Biden held a press conference. And he wants the challenge. He wants to go and do this and take this on. Apparently, he feels ready to do this to basically help his father out. I predict that he's going to be going on a tour of doing interviews, despite his that. And I think that they're going to be Republicans are going to be put into pressure where they don't have any choice but to have a live hearing with him. We'll see if that comes true. But until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.